we've got a report coming up that is going to be referenced in this next presentation. It's the Canadian Businesswomen's or Commonwealth Businesswomen's Network recommendations for boosting women in international trade. You can copy down the tiny URL, or you can take out your smartphone, open the camera, and scan the QR code. The little box will pop open, and then you can tap on that, and then you'll be taken directly to that report, and you can download and save it yourself. Before we go too far, though, I have about a 1-minute video to show you, and then I'm going to turn the floor over to our next session's chair. As always, we will be having a question and answer period at the end of this session, so in about an hour's time. And I would ask that if you have any questions, you can either put them into the chat, or even better, put them into the Q&A box, which you can find in your Zoom toolbar. That's probably either at the top of your screen or the bottom of your screen, depending on what type of device you're on. So without further ado, I am going to I'm getting some feedback here, so I'm just going to see who maybe needs to go on mute for a couple of minutes while we play this video. There we go, nice and quiet. I just realized I went to all that trouble to make it quiet, and there's no sound on this video. Enjoy anyways. And without further ado, I am going to turn it over to the chair of this session. Take it away.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Janet. And I think my camera, Janet, could you just open that up and then
gonna pop up there?
Okay, so that's there. And I'm here. So listen, thank you very much. And Arif, Zaman here. Welcome back. The sun's shining here now. Janet, you were calling us the Canadian Businesswomen's Network. Well, there is actually another CBWN. It's in Calgary, and they're also called CBWN, I think. So there is a link there to Canada. But we love Calgary. We love Canada. So that's not an issue at all.
Yes, now, it was my Freudian slip. No, I'm sorry about that. I'm so used to C standing for Canada.
Janet, we love Canada. All the Commonwealth loves Canada. So there are friends everywhere for Canada. I think that's absolutely true. Let me just begin by saying how delighted I am. I'm Arif Zaman, the Executive Director of the Commonwealth Businesswomen's Network. My colleague Frida was on showing another panel earlier. And we're going to be looking a bit more at this area around trade. There was an earlier session today which provided more of a landscape of what was happening. There was a follow-up after that looking specifically at the impact of technology in the internet value chain over the top technologies and services. And now we're going to be looking at this really in a bit more detail, and really to build some awareness, because I think there's been a lot going on. You could be mistaken for thinking that Brexit and COVID is all that's happened in the last since the last Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. The last one, in fact, which was in London in 2018 in April. The next scheduled one was actually going to be today and tomorrow in Rwanda. But actually, Brexit, and while Brexit was happening, all the discussions, all of that stuff, as well as the pandemic growing, something else has been going on very important, which is Commonwealth trade. And there have been some initiatives that were started in London. They've been continuing despite the challenges around us, and very few people know about them. In fact, I don't want to embarrass the British government, because they've been providing some of the support for this, but all the other governments involved as well, and other stakeholders. But they're some of the Commonwealth best kept secrets. They are not very well known. I don't know why that is. They're nothing to be embarrassed about, nothing to be shy about. So let's all know about these things. And there are a number of them. And I'm just going to give an overview of some of the most critical ones, because they really demonstrate the value of the Commonwealth. And sometimes people will say, the Commonwealth, does it do anything? Does it have an impact? It's just an old-fashioned organization. These are all groundbreaking, initiatives in their own way. I should also just remind people, if people aren't aware, that the most groundbreaking agreement on cybersecurity was actually an agreement signed off by 46 heads of government in person, and they were in London in 2018. So, the Commonwealth leads the way in that area. Indeed, also in another area, in terms of the blue ocean economy, the most wide-ranging agreement on that was also made, and with follow-up plans as well at that London CHOGM, the heads of government meeting. But what I want to do is to turn to some of these initiatives, and there are three in particular. One is Commonwealth HeTrade. I'll say something about that first. And I think what I'll do, I think the way we'll structure this, since we just have the three of us on this panel today, I'm playing a bit of a dual role, both as chair, but also as a part panelist. I'll say something briefly about the Commonwealth HeTrade, and I'll also combine that with some of the work that we've been doing, the Commonwealth Businesswomen's Network in that area. Then after I do that, then we'll hear from Clarisse and Irabagiza, and they say Rwanda again. Well, absolutely Rwanda again. My goodness, they lead the world on gender equality. We need to be listening more to how they do it, but also we need to be thinking of Rwanda today, because we would have been there, many of us, in terms of celebrating the Commonwealth and talking about the things that we need to do better. If the Commonwealth meetings have gone ahead this week in Rwanda, we look forward to being back there. So Clarisse, we'll definitely come to you. We want to hear from you about your journey and your experiences as a woman entrepreneur, an IT entrepreneur. And I know that you're also an UNCTAD eTrade for Women advocate as well. So we'll come to that. And after you've spoken, just giving people a bit of a roadmap of what's happening, I will then say something about the two other key initiatives that the Commonwealth have had since 2018, which I think again are best kept secrets. One of them is the Commonwealth Standards Network. I'll say something about that more later. And the other is the video, in fact, that you just saw, the Commonwealth Connectivity Agenda. Now, if you were to ask me, Arif, what is the metric of impact for Commonwealth in terms of the last 18 months? There are two or three of them I've just covered in that last two sentences. One is the Commonwealth Standards Network. That's grown from 0 to 43 countries in 18 months, which is extraordinary, but I'll come back to that a bit later. But the other is Ministers of Trade. frankly, friends, Ministers of Trade are the hardest people in any cabinet to get together at any one time. They're always
excuse me, Arif, could you speak a little louder, please?
Yep, absolutely. Yep, absolutely. I hope my voice is becoming a bit louder as I'm speaking now, but I'll certainly continue in that.
Thank you.
That's helpful. Thank you, Shafquat. So I was just saying that the Ministers of Trade are amongst the hardest people. Is that better, Shafquat?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, my apologies. Thanks for that. I'm getting better by the minute. So the Ministers of Trade are the hardest people to get together, let alone get them into the same room at any one time. And in fact, the Commonwealth has done that not once but twice in the last 2 years. In fact, that's the first time the trade ministers of the Commonwealth have come together in 40 years, and they've done it twice in the last 2 years. The last time being in London in October. I was in the room with colleagues from the Commonwealth Businesswomen's Network on both occasions, and I'll be saying something about that and linking that into this Commonwealth connectivity agenda a little bit later on. And then after I do that, we'll come to Shafquat, who, Shafquat, like me, we share a common bond in that Shafquat's from Bangladesh. My father's family are from Bangalore, my mother's family from Lahore. So I'm also of South Asian heritage. I have a bit of a problem, Shafquat, by the way, on my British census form. They want me to say, am I British Pakistani, British Indian? And I prefer to say British South Asian, but they don't give me that option. So I have to pigeonhole one of these identities that we have to grapple with in today's world. But there we have it. So let me, that's the plan. So I'll say something briefly, as I say, about Commonwealth HeTrades and the work that we're doing with Businesswomen's Network and Mr. Clarisse. Then I'll come back saying something briefly about the connectivity agenda and the trade ministers meeting, and then we'll go to Shafquat. Now, the reason I'm doing that, to just explain, is that Shafquat was with me both in London in February this year, just before lockdown, in fact, and also last August, which is when we first met. But there's a very long-established relationship between the Commonwealth and the South Chamber. In fact, for a number of years, I ran a program at the Commonwealth Business Council. It was the only collaboration between the Commonwealth Business Council and the South Asian Chamber, and it was very effective. So we have a long-established relationship. The Businesswomen's Network began, in fact, as a program of the Business Council in its origins. But enough of all that. Let me just turn now to Commonwealth HeTrade. So one of the things we have in the Commonwealth, we have a rarity. And I think, Shafquat, your country is one of the few that has the benefit of this rarity. But, you know, if I was to say to you, you know, New Zealand, Bangladesh, Barbados, you know, and what do these countries have in common? And it is that they have a woman head of government. There are relatively few of them. There are probably just a handful of others, but there are relatively few. The UK used to have one, of course. The last head of the UK government, the host of the last Commonwealth head of government meeting, Theresa May. And when she addressed the business forum, and I was there in the room, and she addressed, in fact, it was a combined session of the business forum and the other fora. She announced an initiative about Commonwealth. So what is Commonwealth SheTrades? Well, it's a very significant initiative. It's really about scaling up and supporting women-owned businesses. It's really trying to understand the problem. What's the problem here? Well, the problem is this, that around the world, women still earn less, have fewer assets, bear the burden of unpaid work and care, and are largely concentrated, as we heard earlier today, in vulnerable and low-paying work. And so the UK announced, the UK Prime Minister, it wasn't Boris Johnson, it was his predecessor, but Boris Johnson, as the current chair in office, has continued this. In fact, he's put more investment into this while he's been Prime Minister. So very much a strong commitment, I think, still from the UK. The UK is working to, in its role as chair of the Commonwealth, which it occupies until next year when Rwanda will take that on, is increasing women's role in trade, recognizing the importance of trade as a lever for equality. So this initiative was launched in April 2018. It aims to do a number of things. It aims to increase economic growth and job creation in the Commonwealth countries by generating sales worth £28 million. You say that again? Sales worth £28 million through increased participation of women-owned businesses in international trade. Number one. Number two, it's providing direct support to 2,500 women-owned businesses. Many of them actually are, you know, the kind of businesses that are members of, in their own right, individuals of the Commonwealth Businesswomen's Network. 2,500 women-owned businesses through intensive training, mentoring and coaching, and connecting them to international markets and investment opportunities. And thirdly, it's around developing a tool, a SheTrades Outlook tool, to help governments access data required to understand the barriers women face to trading equally, freely and equally, promoting better policy making for the benefit of women entrepreneurs across the Commonwealth. Now, this started some time ago. To date, the program has enhanced opportunities for almost 3,000 women-owned businesses to trade internationally by increasing their business expertise in a range of strategic areas, including marketing, branding, packaging, and export strategies through training and coaching. Selected companies are given the opportunity to attend business linkage events, such as international trade fairs, and supported to turn buyer interest into leads and ultimately sales. And the program started in 4 countries. Shafquat, I think you know, because Bangladesh is one of those countries. It's also in Ghana and in Kenya and also in Nigeria. The selection was based on trade potential and flows between Commonwealth countries. We've been hearing about some of that a bit earlier today. Also a critical mass of near export ready women-owned businesses, potential for high development impact, and a consideration of geographical spread and existing footprint. Now, you may be asking the question, that's all great, but that was phase 1. Is that the end of the story, or is there a phase 2? Well, I've got news to tell you, there is a phase 2, and just a few weeks ago, the UK government announced a further development of this program to take it further. So the intention now is to take the program to more countries, to make it more cross-culture, more cross-Commonwealth. So during this extension, which is going to run until the next Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting and perhaps beyond, the program will continue to support Commonwealth partner governments. And I would strongly encourage anybody from a Commonwealth member government that's watching this right now, they're not one of those countries, the first thing they should do is they should go to their member of parliament, they should go to their head of government and say, we want to be part of this. It will help to build the fabric of connectivity in the Commonwealth. So this is, in this phase 2, what this is doing is this will ensure that this tool I refer to, the Outlook tool, and also the associated practices of data collection and transparency are fully embedded and the consequent benefits realized. Now, this Outlook tool to support women in trade has been already very well received. The rollout phase was successful. So it's now already being embedded in use across 25 countries. And there's work going on in that direction. So This is very important. I mean, there's a long-term vision here, which is not just a short-term idea. Several £million going into this initiative, and it's all about helping governments and the private sector and women businesses themselves to better understand the position and role of women in target value chains across different countries, to look at how it's affected women in the value chain as business owners, as employees, and as producers, and communities more broadly, and also to look at which interventions have had the greatest impact. So I won't say more about that, but there is, you know, an important initiative. I would simply say on that, I mean, there are some, I mean, you may ask, how's it being implemented? Again, just some headline points. It's around, there's Commonwealth-wide support, there's capacity building involved, it's working through business support organizations. We're one of those business support organizations. Interestingly, we're the only business support organization that's actually directly recognized by the UK government as well. So we certainly want to have a follow-up conversation with Boris Johnson and his team to see how we could help him deliver on this. But the other area is looking at private sector partners, and that's also what they're doing as well. So that's the Commonwealth HeTrade, and I'd be really interested to learn, Shafquat, from when you speak a bit later, any observations or interactions you've had with them, or what you feel more could be done in that area. I can briefly just turn, finally, before I turn to Clarisse, how does that link into what we do, the Commonwealth Businesswomen's Network? Well, it was very significant, and when the Commonwealth governments met in April 2018, it was the first time that heads of government anywhere, the UN or any meeting, actually came out with a statement that trade was not gender neutral. That is as simple as that. That's what they said. Let me quote you what they said exactly. They said, and I quote, from the meeting from the 54 heads of government, and the 46 of them were in London in person in April 2018, on a sunny day like today, in fact. They said, under the paragraph inclusive and sustainable economic growth, they said, and I quote, to promote inclusive and sustainable economic growth, heads of government resolved to address systemic barriers to women's full and equal participation in the economy by taking a gender-responsive approach to the development of trade policy and to promote women's economic empowerment. They encouraged Commonwealth and partner organizations to work towards an increase in the number and enhancement of the success rate of women-owned businesses, break down gender barriers in all sectors, and increase opportunities for women to trade internationally, end quote. Now, what they didn't say was how. That is where the Commonwealth Businesswomen's Network comes in. We're the only organization, as I mentioned earlier, to be recognized directly by 54 governments for our work in this area of women's economic empowerment and women in leadership. Again, I just want to reiterate for those of you who didn't hear me this morning, I'm the only guy involved. I'm outnumbered. Actually, I'm outnumbered everywhere, actually. I'm outnumbered at home, where I've got 2 daughters and a wife, and I'm outnumbered. I'm actually outnumbered in the Commonwealth Businesswomen's Network everywhere. You know, in terms of the board, the senior management team, executive management team, the broader community, and that's absolutely right that I am outnumbered. But we did a lot of work over quite some time, asking, you know, the question of women-owned businesses. We 43 countries and face-to-face meetings over 4 years. Out of all of that, we developed a 10-point action plan for increasing opportunities for women to trade internationally. So it's very much the how to meet what heads of government themselves called for. And I'm not going to go through this in detail, but just in headline terms, I'm going to say what the 10 points are. Now, the link that Janet put up a moment ago actually would enable you to access the full document, which is only about 7 or 8 pages, but I'm just going to give you the headlines now. The first of them is around strengthening women's voice and agency in trade policy and in regional and multilateral trade negotiations and related fora. That was the reason why I made the point quite strongly this morning about women being in the room. It's frankly not enough to just talk about these issues if we don't have women in the room. I was, to share again the anecdote from this morning, the last business forum, I was in a room of 800 people in the City of London in the business forum. They had a whole panel discussion on technology. There were no women on the panel. There were very few women in that group of 800. Frankly, it was a joke, and it was a very bad joke of that. And I just think that's not That's not, it's not right, it's not fair, it doesn't even make sense. So we really need to ensure that that changes. So we were instrumental at the last meeting of Women's Affairs Ministers. The Commonwealth Secretary General put forward this position around gender mainstreaming, saying that when Commonwealth ministers meet, they should have, gender balanced delegations, they should have gender items on the agenda. We, the Businesswomen's Network, were only able to make one direct intervention at the Women's Ministers meeting. We made it very strongly and very boldly. We said, with respect, ministers, it's not just about you, the politician. It's not just about you. It's about all of us. It's about when you convene meetings where you're working and you're speaking to the business community, such as the Business Forum or any other meeting for that matter. That meeting also needs to ensure that women are there and they're heard and they're listened to. And we all know hearing and listening are two different things as we reflect. Hearing is one thing, listening is something else. So women's voice and agency in trade policy is important, and also in regional and multilateral trade negotiations. We were very fortunate being able to give direct evidence to the House of Commons Select Committee on International Trade as part of their report on trade with developing Commonwealth countries, and we made that point very strongly, and that was very well taken. The second point is around aid for trade. A number of countries are benefiting from this initiative, which was launched by the World Trade Organization about a decade ago. Interestingly, not enough is being done to target that aid for trade, where it's using development money from donors to target particularly women's economic empowerment, particularly in areas like ICT. So that's the second area. We need to target aid for trade for women's economic empowerment. Point number three, we need to look at trade missions. Now, of course, we're living in a COVID world. Trade delegations aren't happening. As a former airline person, worked for British Airways for many years, no international travel for 2 or 3 years, which is, decimated the travel industry. So trade missions are going to have to be rethought. But it's clearly the case that generally trade missions are very male dominated, and that needs to change. So we pioneered the shift there with what we call multilateral trade missions, where women are in the majority, not men. But we need to think about women-led and gender-balanced trade missions. That's the third point. The fourth point is around capacity building and training, but particularly related to trade. And this is particularly in areas that are growing service sectors. This was talked a bit about earlier by Dr. Salbat Ali in one of the earlier sessions today, particularly so that we're enhancing their competitiveness and their participation, not just in supply chain at a local level or at a regional level, but also at a global level. And we talk about supply chain, but increasingly we obviously need to think about the language of value chain, because that's the important thing for economies in the Commonwealth, particularly in Asia and Africa and the Caribbean, to move up the value chain, to diversify, to reduce their dependency on areas like commodities, and also move up into other areas. And also to harness opportunities for born global firms. What do I mean by born global firm? Well, this is a firm that with an internet connection and an idea and someone with a network, they can have international customers from day one. It's as simple as that. And we have to think about women-owned businesses in that context as well. Point number 5, and this was picked up strongly this morning in the opening session, it's around closing the gender digital divide. So I'm not going to say more about that because I think Clarisse can speak very well to that shortly. The 6th area is about gender impact assessments. There's a lot of discussions right now about trade agreements, free trade agreements, this, that, the other, but actually we need to think about the gender impact of these agreements, not just afterwards, but before as well, and look at the impact. And there are there's a lot of good ideas, a lot of tools around that, but gender impact assessments in trade policy are very important. Number 7, it's about data, my friends. Data. I remember when Tony Blair became Prime Minister, around that time, he made a very powerful speech about saying, his priorities were education. I think in some respects, the Commonwealth priorities on gender has to be data, because what we need is gender disaggregated trade data. We need trade data. It's not enough. If you're a woman-owned business and you never win a bid from a local authority, to bid for your tenders, and you try and find out how many women have ever had that experience, and then you find out that they never break out the data, so there's no way of telling whether the tender application is from a male-owned business or a female-owned business. That's not going to help in terms of addressing gender equality. So we need to think about gender disaggregated trade data. Number 8, we need to think about access to finance. Now, access to finance is a bit of an old chestnut. I mean, when the Commonwealth Businesswomen's Network was at the last heads of government meeting in Africa in 2007 in Uganda, they highlighted the importance of that, and I think that's certainly an area that was talked about strongly there. I'm not sure whether, can you still hear me clearly? Yeah, I think you can. Yeah. So sorry, you can still hear me? Yeah, I'm just checking.
You can. It just sometimes your voice drifts off a little bit, Arif, and you also speak very quickly. So anybody who is maybe listening in their second or third language, maybe for their benefit, if you could just speak up a little bit and slow it down just a tip.
Absolutely, Janet. Thank you so much for that caution, and I will do exactly that. So my apologies. I'm trying to steamroller this through, but maybe I should not do the steamroller. Do the slow walk rather than the fast trot. So let me do that. So going back to what I was just saying a moment ago, I mean, basically the work around this was in terms of the importance of access to finance. We talked about it in 2007. That's still an issue. Banks are still a challenge, can be a challenge, but we need to think about not just existing sources of finance, but emerging areas such as crowdfunding, such as digital currencies, such as Islamic finance. You know, many Muslim countries in the Commonwealth and many Muslim minority populations as well. So we need to think about that, not just for women to start their businesses, but also to grow their businesses and to grow from small to medium to larger businesses. Point number 9, and I touched upon it a bit earlier, is the P word. And I'm talking about procurement. So prioritizing and leveraging government and private procurement to use diverse suppliers to enhance so that women-owned businesses can secure more contracts. Now, if I was to ask you, what percentage of contracts are won by women-owned businesses, whether you're in Canada or whether you're in Calcutta, whether you're in Montego Bay or whether you're in Multan, the same percentage comes up, and it's less than 1%. Let me say that again, less than 1% of women-owned businesses win contracts for tenders from government or the private sector. And we made this point on the floor of the United Nations 3.5 years ago, that statistic hasn't changed in 70 years. Makes no sense at all. So that's an area that I think we want to do more work around. And the 10th area is around standards. So ensuring women's participation in standards development and also ensuring in their implementation that standards are gender neutral. Now, having gone through those 10 points, I'm going to stop with that. But there is more detail behind those points in our report in our action plan that we launched both at the Women's Affairs Ministers meeting in Nairobi last September, and we also took that to the Trade Ministers meeting that was held in London. Many of these points were very widely welcomed. In fact, governments and the private sector were saying to us, we've been saying this for some time, but you've now brought this together in a single document with supported by evidence. This is exactly what we need to do. So what I would say to all of you, we have the 2 things that you need for change. We have the political commitment, and we have the recipe, and we have the people. You know, we have the private sector, we have the governments, we have the women in business. Let's do it. Let's get on with it. And that's what we need to do. Now, with all of that, let me then turn to our speaker, our first speaker. I wanted to give that bit of an overview. And then after we've heard from Clarisse, what I'm going to then do is say something briefly about the Commonwealth connectivity agenda, and then ask Shafquat, who was there with me as part of the discussions on that, for his thoughts and observations about that. But let me begin by inviting Clarisse Irabagiza, who is the founder and chief executive officer of DMM, HeHe in Rwanda, to make some remarks. She's also one of the eTrade for Women advocates in the UNCTAD program, which started just a few months ago, I think last year. I believe she's the only person from a Commonwealth country who's in that UNCTAD program, which is another reason, Clarisse, why we were delighted that you're able to join us today. And over to you, the floor is yours, the virtual floor, I should say, and we're delighted to have you with us. And another nod to the Republic of Rwanda today, where we're delighted to hear from you in Kigali, as I think where you are. Clarisse, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Arif. Can you hear me?
Very clearly.
Great, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. And thank you so much for the background that you just shared. It was very informative, and I'm happy to share from our experience, both on a personal level and what we've been doing in the e-commerce space, in the trade space in Rwanda. Just to give you a brief background, I started my business about 10 years ago. And our focus was, how do we digitize the trade ecosystem? Because we could see that that was going to be the direction that we would be taking. We had seen the likes of Amazon, Alibaba, happening, and we knew Africa, this was, in a short amount of time, this would be the reality. And so we've been focusing on optimizing supply chains and e-commerce in general. And, during this COVID-19 pandemic, e-commerce was one of the ways that the economy remained open during lockdown, and, just enabling people to access essential goods like food. And e-commerce is still seen as a critical component for economic recovery post-COVID-19. So in terms of closing the gender divide, enabling women to participate in the digital economy, there are a couple of things that we're doing, and maybe I'll just speak to three today. I myself am a product of Rwanda's, gender sensitive and progressive policies, enabling me to, start a business as, a junior in college at 22, and I've gotten a lot of support along the way. We have, our Minister of Trade is a woman, our Minister of ICT is a woman. So there are a lot of great things that, are happening for women in Rwanda and continue to happen. And, even in our own business, what we've seen during the last couple of years, the number of businesses that we've enabled to get online, 60% of them are women-led businesses. And, you see a lot of women stepping out, trying to, participate in the economy. And there are so many platforms for them to be able to do that here in Rwanda. And, we are happy to see that 60% of the businesses that we support as HeHe, which, we focus on, enabling businesses to access digital tools like, payments, get online, have an e-commerce store, how do you run digital fulfillment services, all of that. So 60% is quite significant for us. And, that's one of the things that we're really proud of. And we're running a Made in Rwanda e-commerce incubation program for the next 3 years, just to support women in, in businesses that are majority women. These are sectors like agriculture, where you find a lot of women are participating in the agriculture value chain, or fashion and other SMEs. And we see this as a great opportunity to continue to enable women to access the skills and other opportunities, access to finance, to enable their businesses to continue to thrive. And last but not least, what we're doing right now with UNCTAD, with the eTrade for Women advocacy role that I play, is, upskilling women to participate more in the digital economy. And I'll speak about the masterclass that we're having in about 2 weeks, starting July 8th. Targeting women in the East African region. We'll be, working with maybe close to 70 to 100 women. We'll go through a 3-day masterclass, upskilling them and just equipping them with the skills and the tools that they need to be able to thrive in the digital economy. So a lot of great things happening for women, but we're obviously working towards seeing even much greater results. But again, thank you for having me here today.
Clarisse, thank you very much. Can I just, ask a couple of things briefly on what you said? And we were actually virtually together previously. This is our second virtual encounter. We were together in Geneva virtually at the UNCTAD e-commerce week about 6 weeks or so ago. And you will recall, Clarisse, you were on another panel there and talking about some of these challenges that women entrepreneurs have. And I'd just like to ask you in particular, in the last 2 or 3 months, how have you been able to adapt your business model? How have you been able to adapt your approach and to survive, if not thrive, I don't know, maybe thrive in the challenging context? Now, I know that Rwanda, you're not as exposed as I am in the UK. I mean, the UK is far more exposed to COVID. It's one of the worst in the world in that respect in terms of its statistics, although it probably doesn't like talking about it in that way. But in terms of, obviously there is concern of its growth. There's a lot of concern as I speak in South Asia right now. But how have you been able to adapt to that change situation, especially given that it may not have a direct impact on you because you're an IT business, but obviously in relation to your broader relationships, it must be very disruptive.
It was disruptive. Nobody was prepared for COVID-19. But in terms of how we've been able to adapt, yes, we have made changes to our business model. We've focused more on building more resilient supply chains. Right now, one of the things that we're doing that we were not doing before is going as far back to the first mile, for example, in the agriculture supply chain, making sure that we're working directly with farmers, trying to get their goods from the farm to the end consumer. So initially we worked with wholesale markets, but now we're going as far back as the farmland, and even using, technologies such as geospatial technologies to do yield prediction, just so we're able to plan around the supply chains and the logistics needed for that. So that's something really significant that we've done, trying to make sure that we have more resilient supply chains, because the post-harvest loss issue that we saw during COVID-19 was extreme. And I mean, we're already dealing with statistics such as 60% post-harvest loss. So during COVID-19, that went up to about maybe 80% or more. People were literally throwing away food. So we're trying to see how we can have more resilient supply chains there. And we've repurposed our business to, simply work along that supply chain. But also, secondly, we've been engaging directly with government, with our leadership, trying to make sure that, we are co-creating an environment that allows for businesses to thrive. How are we getting businesses online? Right now there are a couple of platforms, e-commerce platforms, that are currently 0 rated, so you can access them online for free. So there are a lot of people who are initially unable to access the internet, and now they're able to, still go online and access these essential goods without, necessarily having access to the internet. And that's very significant for us, and that came out of all these that kind of advocacy that we've been trying to do with government. So there are a few things, but I'd like to highlight those two as very critical things that we've done in this season.
I mean, they're both great examples, and I think you didn't use the word agility, but I think that certainly comes across from what you were saying. Being able to be responsive in a fast and flexible way, absolutely comes across. And I think your point around the platform is fascinating. And I mean, Clarisse, you really should have a chat with Tana Sivasambu, who's one of our chief operating officers based here in London, and she's one of working with Angela, other chief operating officers, driving our work on the Commonwealth's first digital platform for women, which is being paid for by women, and it's for women, not to have a chat over chai, but to do business, business. And that's something it's now operational, and we have great plans for it, and it's very exciting. And that, if you go to our website, cbwn.org, anybody can sign up. It's free at the point of access, and there's a lot of potential there. But we'd love to speak to you about that and get your input and ideas. And we see that really as providing, for the first time, this connectivity in a virtual sense for women across the Commonwealth. And thank you very, very much for those remarks. I think the UNCTAD program that you highlighted is that program that you referred to, is that being done virtually in July?
Yes, it will be virtual. It's an e-masterclass.
E-masterclass, right? Okay, well, that's great. And people want to know more about that. Can they only participate from those participating countries, or?
Yes, it is for women in East Africa. I'm sure you can sign up, but maybe the timing might not work for everybody. So the time zone will be specific for East Africa.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for mentioning that. Well, what I'll now do is we'll come back to you perhaps in a few moments after we've gone to Shafquat. I'm just going to, Shafquat, before I bring you in, we've got quite a bit of time to go. We're just under halfway through, I think, Janet. We're due to finish, I think, at 4:30, if I'm mistaken. Unless I'm mistaken, but
we are scheduled to start a question period at 4 o'clock, which is 20 minutes from now.
Okay, great. Well, we may push that back by about 5 minutes or so, but I will try and now address the other two things. Shafquat will be one of the two things. Before Shafquat comes in, I want to say something very briefly about the two other initiatives that I mentioned. One of them is the Commonwealth Standards Network. So this is around providing opportunities for particularly standards in the Commonwealth, and it was very significant that the Commonwealth Standards announcement was made by the British Prime Minister 2 years ago. It's all about trying to enhance opportunities for trade in the Commonwealth, so to bring down the cost of trade. We know the cost of trade between Commonwealth partners is 19% lower than between non-members. So what this is about is the aim of the Commonwealth Standards Network is to boost trade between the Commonwealth by increasing the use of existing international standards, and by providing a platform for collaboration. The network is already allowing countries and members to share their knowledge, trying out new approaches, and creating vital links between the economies. So the technical assistance program, it's working with national organizations that are their standards agencies. It started in Uganda, Zambia, Papua New Guinea, Vanuatu, and St. Lucia. It's now extending to other countries. There are now, I think, some 43 countries, I believe, that have signed up to that initiative. And standards are very important in terms of driving this. So the work of the Commonwealth Standards Network has become even more important in recent months with COVID. And there is work that they're doing, particularly in the area of health, to ensure that there are guidance documents, there is enhanced training being provided. So the Commonwealth Standards Network really is one of the best kept secrets. There's a lot of work going on there. One of the standards that we at the Commonwealth Businesswomen's Network have been very vocal about is the standard, the international standard on collaboration. Yes, there is a standard on how you work better together, whether you're a government or a private sector, whether you're a not-for-profit or a for-profit, whether you're a woman-owned business and you're not a woman-owned business. And that collaboration standard was championed by the UK. It's now an international standard. Countries like the UK and Malaysia were instrumental in making it happen. And we work very closely with the Institute for Collaborative Working, which drives a lot of that engagement on that. And we are certainly working to have that adopted as a best practice model for collaboration in the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth Secretary General herself is personally very much behind this approach and standard, but I think standards are an area that is an important opportunity to enhance trade in the Commonwealth that people probably aren't aware of, but we will be doing more following this event today to make that people much more aware of that and how they can benefit from it. The final thing is to refer back to the video that we started the session with before I bring Shafquat in, and this was the Commonwealth. This was the Commonwealth Connectivity Agenda. So there was a lot of talk at the Commonwealth Trade Ministers meeting about inclusive and sustainable trade, realizing that international trade can play a central role in poverty reduction, and that countries have made trade and exports a key part of their development strategy, and countries that have done that have grown at a faster rate. So inclusive trade, when we're talking about inclusive trade, we're particularly thinking in the Commonwealth context about women, about young people. Clarisse, I won't embarrass you by asking you how old you are or how young you are, but I think you're certainly younger than me. I will give my age away, but I think young in the Commonwealth context, I think it's 16 to 29, but certainly youth and marginalised groups as well is what we mean by that. So when the Commonwealth in 2018 they met, they adopted this connectivity agenda. A big part of that was the importance of not just trade but inclusive and sustainable development. And there was a particular reference to gender equality in the context of ensuring full and equal participation of women in the economy, as I referred to earlier. So gender participation is a key part of that, and there is follow-up work going on in that area. There was a meeting that was held, which I'll come back to in a moment, in relation to the Commonwealth Connectivity Week. There was this recognition that there's a target of $2 trillion for intra-Commonwealth trade and expanded investment by 2030. There are 4 objectives here: global growth, knowledge sharing, employment creation, and development. This is a phased approach. There are governments leading in different areas. There's a digital connectivity cluster. Countries involved in that range from Malta to Pakistan to Trinidad and Tobago to the UK to Australia. That's being chaired by the UK. We have the physical connectivity cluster. Countries like Uganda and Botswana, Brunei involved in that, Australia. There's a supply side connectivity cluster. Samoa, St. Kitts, Vanuatu, Fiji, Gambia, Guyana, others involved in that. There's a regulatory connectivity cluster, looking at how to enhance regulatory, how to address regulatory barriers for trade. Countries like Kenya, Malaysia, many others involved in that as well. And these, all in total, there's actually 113 ministries, involved agencies, but also the private sector. And when I say the private sector, I mean chambers of commerce, I mean entrepreneurs, the business community, and yes, the Commonwealth Businesswomen's Network, which I'll come back to in a moment. So what have they done? What have they done since London in 2018? Well, in digital, they've developed high-level principles on digital connectivity, and I'm very proud to say that we were at the forefront of the Businesswomen's Network in ensuring that also addressed online harm as well. So that was one of the areas. On physical connectivity, they developed principles on sustainable investment for digital infrastructure. On regulatory, they also developed Commonwealth Good Regulatory practice principles on the supply side. They've baselined work around smart agriculture and fisheries. They've looked at sectoral exchange on the coconut sector. And on the business-to-business side, there's been wide consultation, including with organizations like the Businesswomen Network. There's also an academic network as part of this process as well. There are best practice tools, and so there's a lot of work going on in that area. And this is really recognizing the global megatrends. And when I was in the room when trade ministers talked about these megatrends, about the nature of trade changing, multilateralism entering a new phase, climate change, of course, demographics, urbanization, technology, all of what we're talking about today. Of course, health and the pandemic now comes into that as well. And so this is a very important initiative around digital connectivity, supporting the development of national digital economies, physical connectivity, which is about supporting best practice in digital infrastructure development, regulatory connectivity, which is around improving regulatory regimes across the Commonwealth, supply side connectivity, which is around encouraging the participation of all members in global value chains, that we talked a bit about earlier, and underpinning that is inclusive and sustainable trade. So there is a real impetus behind that. As I say, there are dashboards, there are sharing of knowledge and experiences. The UN actually looks to the Commonwealth and its leadership in this area. When the meeting took place in February, UNCTAD actually flew, and so I was in the room there when they said, the Commonwealth, you're leading on this. We need to learn a thing from you in terms of how you're doing it. So I think it really is a very important initiative. And there was a survey that was done as part of this process, which was shared with us. And Shafquat, this is an opportunity now for you to come in straight after I finish making these brief points. The private sector survey on priority issues for Commonwealth trade and investment. I'll just pick up on a few of them. They talked about the impact of digitization, of course, the impact significant in changing the core technologies used in production or provision of services, about very high, almost 40%. 85% of surveyed businesses believe that automation and other technologies will impact positively on inter-Commonwealth trade in the next 5 years. That'll be even higher now in terms of barriers to the greatest concern about doing business in other Commonwealth countries was actually a lack of knowledge, a lack of market information, and then a difference in legal and regulatory systems. And then in terms of the barriers to e-commerce and digital trade, right at the top of the list is inadequate infrastructure to support e-commerce and digital trade. But right behind that, that was 40%, right behind that is 30, just under 30% are insufficient skills to effectively use digital services and platforms for e-commerce and digital trade. And I should say that also includes, Janet, e-learning as well. And that's very much part of the mix as well. Customs inefficiencies were also talked about, licensing procedures, and the private sector said very clearly that we need to look at promoting exports. We need to also consider environmental sustainability. We also need to look at 4 focus areas for prioritizing and promoting intra-Commonwealth trade, such as customs efficiency, digital infrastructure, transport, lower trade costs, access to digital technologies. These are all the things that came out of that discussion, as well as women's economic empowerment that I've referred to earlier. Now, having gone through that, let me stop. There's more I could say, but let me stop at that. And then invite Shafquat to join us. Now, I have to acknowledge Shafquat, who at very short notice was able to join us. And I know it's 10 to 9 in Dhaka right now, but thank you for joining us. I know that people eat late in the Southeast, so I hope you've already, in South Asia, I hope you've already had your khana this evening. But in any case, thank you, Shafquat, for joining us. Shafquat Haider is on the executive committee of the South Asian Chamber, the SAARC Chamber of Commerce and Industry. He's also managing director of Ciproco Computers, very long established pioneering company in Bangladesh. Shafquat, over to you, and I'd like to invite your response in 2 or 3 areas. One is, what do you think about the work the Commonwealth is doing? And you were there with me in terms of the Commonwealth connectivity agenda. What do you think are its strengths or its weaknesses? What do you think could be done better? What do you think, from what you've seen, is the impact of that? The second thing I'd like you to think about is the impact of digital businesses and in digital trade as a digital business yourself. And thirdly, picking up on what Clarisse was saying, how are businesses in South Asia, particularly in the SAARC community of South Asia, covering I think 8 countries, of which 5 are in the Commonwealth, including the Maldives as well, India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and the Maldives, how are they responding to COVID at a time when I know things are literally changing by the hour across South Asia? So Shafquat, over to you, and delighted to have you with us today.
Thank you very much, Arif. Greetings from Bangladesh. A very good afternoon, good evening, as the case may be to all of you. I'd like to thank the Commonwealth and in particular the Commonwealth Businesswomen's Network and the Commonwealth Telecommunications Organization for having invited me to this event. The people behind the scenes are definitely part of it. It is an honor and a privilege, and I'm delighted to be here with all of you. A lot of people use the word post-COVID. I really don't know what it means because we don't know where it's going to end. Reality is, we are in COVID times and we will be in it for a very, very long time to come. This is not to be pessimistic, but to be practical and pragmatic. This pandemic has wreaked havoc on the world and we are all being impacted in real time. Coming to trade, the topic of today, and trends and patterns, which was the name of the session, where would we be without technology? Where would we be today? This meeting today is proof. The world would be dead without connectivity. Connectivity is a live issue in all economies, small, big, and advanced. Trade is an integral part of the economy. Access to communication is a default mechanism for trade. All countries and regions of the world have been concentrating on mechanism of how to develop and promote trade. I'm coming up with a new word. You cannot afford to be digitally deprived. We've used this word digital divide for a long, long time. It just meant those who have it, those who do not have it. In today's time, you cannot make anybody to be deprived of the digital connectivity. It is important for trade. It is important for economy. It is important for survival. It should be kind of a baseline of how things go moving forward. You can write volumes on recovery plans, but without digital connectivity, where would you be? I'll touch upon a subject which Arif just mentioned. He mentioned the word standards. Now that's something I'm happy to inform you that I happen to be the spokesperson for the Quality Infrastructure Work Group. Now, why are we using the word quality infrastructure? It means standards, it means mutual recognition agreements, it means accreditation policies, everything all bunched in one. The reason we came with this word quality infrastructure, let me step back a little bit, was the fact that most businesses in any country, they're not really connected to the standards and accreditation institutes because that part is supposed to be government and the other part is business, okay? So the whole exercise was built up on the premise that once we have a quality infrastructure group representing the private sector or the business chambers, we could go hand in hand with the government and bring everybody together on the same page. So that was the effort. Is still ongoing, and this is for the SAARC region. Just today, by the way, we had a get-together of the SAARC chambers, and the topic of the day was South Asia regional integration in the midst of COVID-19. So you see, this is an active, live subject. Everybody is harping on the same issue. Now, how do we go about it? We might have different policies, but the end result has got to be the same. Improving the lives of the people. Of course, our digital dependency has greatly increased suddenly, and this will give a huge fillip to all over digitalization of our societies and economies. This then also makes policy development equally important and urgent, and we can no longer take a wait and watch approach. Not just basic connectivity, but many kinds of basic digital services are becoming almost of the nature of essential services. And some need better regulation and others may even be needed to be provided as public or utility-like services. As far as I know, India and the European Union is undertaking considerable work on public digital infrastructure. And this may be worth emulating in all developing countries. There's something else I'd like to mention here, which is a little digression, not really, but I'd like to point it out here. Though COVID has taken many issues to the back burner, but talking about the future of trade development in the Commonwealth, Brexit remains a very important post issue now. So how do we maximize the post-Brexit gains of Commonwealth countries in the post-COVID should be an interesting area to explore. COVID has given a huge boost to the services sector, trade, like IT-enabled services, e-commerce, and stuff like that. It is an area in which the CTO and UK and the Commonwealth Secretariat should concentrate more studies and infrastructure investments. Also, before the Commonwealth countries talk about bilateral or plurilateral free trade agreement in goods with the UK, it would be interesting this time to start with a free trade agreement in services. For the time being, I'd like to stop here. There are many other issues I'd like to mention, which refer to digitalization. But if Arif, you have a particular question, I'd be happy to answer that. I can't hear you.
He's on mute.
Your mic is closed, Arif.
Unmute. Yeah, thank you very much for that, Shafquat. I'm grateful to you for your comments and remarks there. And I think it is interesting and instructive, encouraging, in fact, to hear that the South Asia Chamber is looking at what it can do in the current moment. Clearly, concentration of the world's population in South Asia, the density of populations, but also, one has to say, the innovation and creativity right across. I think every country in South Asia, you know, is actually capable of that innovation. And I think hopefully there'll be a way to come through this. I think, can I ask you just before we open up questions, just to very specifically about what your thoughts are on the connectivity agenda? Because, you know, you were there when we met with other business organizations, with the Commonwealth Secretariat and other governments in the work that they were doing. You sat with me in the room for those 2 or 3 days, both in August last year and earlier this year. What do you think? Is it, how much potential is there with the Commonwealth connectivity agenda? Is it a waste of time? What are your thoughts?
My first answer is, it's not a waste of time. The only thing which I would really impress upon is time is of essence, and we need to move much faster, because we can have meetings upon meetings upon meetings, but we need to have timelines of implementation.
Yeah.
And then look at the timelines, what we have achieved, what we did not achieve, what was the reason for that. I mean, every study, every timeline, deadline has to have an impact assessment. As long as we can do that, we might fail, we might pass the system, but we have to monitor that. That, I think, is of essence, but the subject matter is absolutely correct, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, that's very helpful to know. Janet, we over to you for questions. Sorry a few minutes later than planned, but we still have about half an hour or so. So any comments or questions that we can take up?
Yeah, we have, we just really have one question that has come up several times throughout the day, and I actually pulled together a slide for it very quickly, so I'm going to share that. A number of persons throughout the day have asked about the presentation slides and the videos, and would the information be posted. So I've been connecting with Tana behind the scenes here, and she has let me know that once we have all of the videos tidied up from today's event as well as tomorrow's event, we will be posting them on the Commonwealth Businesswomen's Network. And also that there will be an email go out to everyone that shares the links to these videos, as well as the presentations and the various documents that we've had available over the course of the day that embedded in those QR codes. So we don't have any specific questions.
If that's the case, can I maybe go back to Clarisse, if that's okay, and maybe just ask, what do we do in a situation, Clarisse, it's interesting, if you look at South Asia and if you look at Africa, one of the things that's been a highlight of Commonwealth, intra-Commonwealth trade in the last 10 years has been the significant increase in trade between South Asia and Africa. You know, I mean, a lot of that is between India, but I mean, it's not just India, there are other countries as well. But there is a challenge here, Shafquat, and this is the very simple challenge. Bangladesh doesn't have a high commission in some of the fastest growing markets in Africa.
Correct.
African countries do not have a high commission in some of the fastest growing markets in South Asia. And I could say the same would be true in other parts of the Commonwealth. So we have a dilemma here. When governments frame their work on exports, on trade promotion, etc., they haven't got a clue. They don't know on the ground what are the opportunities in these markets. It may be a Rwanda, it may be a Namibia, It may be in South Asia, it may be a Bangladesh, it may be a Pakistan. Countries like India, I think, are a bit different because they're much better known, and their size, of course, will mean that in many cases there will be direct presence and representation there. But in many cases, and Clarisse, if you were to think, you can think of many countries in Africa where there is no Rwanda High Commission. In Africa, they're probably quite well represented, but outside of Africa, there'll be a number of countries where there isn't one. But this isn't a Rwanda issue. This is a broader issue. There are many countries that don't have that. So in that case, Shafquat, we can do one of two things. We can either pack up and go home, put our hands in the air, or we could do what you were suggesting, the 3 Ps, pragmatic and be persistent. And I think this is where, Clarisse, I look to you. And this is where, Shafquat, I look to you. And I look to us as the private sector. We need to be providing the bridge. We need to be saying to our governments and say, look, honorable minister or whoever it is, we may not have a direct presence in X country, but we know that there are business opportunities for our businesses in that country and vice versa. And just because that isn't the case, maybe we could organize a visit or a trade delegation, or we could do a virtual connection, or maybe we could even import some of their films, because culture is a great conveyor of how the world lives. Music, of course, is another. So I just want to ask you what we do with that, because that is, we never talk about that actually. We never talk about the lack of physical presence by governments in Commonwealth countries, but it is a real issue. And I think it's particularly, Clarisse, an issue for countries like Rwanda that don't have, huge numbers of high commissions outside of Africa. And that's not a Rwanda issue, that's also like some other countries. But it's also an issue, I think, for a country like Bangladesh, Shafquat, where, of course, there are a number of high growth markets, and Bangladesh just isn't there. So how do we respond to that? And what do you think the private sector can do to remedy that situation? Let me ask Clarisse first and then go to Shafquat. Clarisse.
Yeah, thank you so much, Arif. I'll just speak to what we're doing exactly in this specific context. And what we've done right now is in partnership with relevant government stakeholders, we're trying to use a data-driven approach to determining what kind of trade is happening between various countries, and how can we then plan the next steps as to how, maybe if we need to have a physical presence there, how do we need to engage with them further. So that's one thing we've done. And just to be more specific, we're working with our Ministry of Agriculture, and in terms of exports, agriculture exports, trying to see ways that we can specifically, plan for the flights that are going to markets where we see a lot of trade happening, or even just have much more dedicated presence or logistics to enhance trade with those countries. So I will say on our end, we're leveraging technology, trying to see how we can use the data that we have to then, plan the next steps and the policies around that would make sense for us as a country. There are many things that we could do around it, but I think technology does present a great opportunity, a great platform for getting started. And that's just something practical we've done.
Yeah, that's a very good. Shafquat, over to you. Thank you very much, Clarisse.
Yeah, I'll come in on that. First thing which you described as the physical presence, there's been an issue because in a country like Bangladesh, there are quite a few African countries which are not present, but they are actually present in India. So reaching India, that's the first hurdle. I need a visa to go visit India to the relevant African High Commission or embassy to get a visa. Okay, so that's a typical problem here in our part of the world. The other is some of the African countries have honorary consuls sitting in Bangladesh, which is at least a step forward, but not really enabling us to do everything possible like visas and all that. But at least we can reach them and say, listen, this is what we want to get done. So that's been an issue. And I'd like to come back to something which you're aware of and which has been up and in the works, is the formation or the development of a ICSA, Inter-Commonwealth SME Trade Portal. You must have heard this word, which came up before. And this was actually launched as a pilot phase at the Commonwealth Games at the Adelaide by the Honourable Secretary General of the Commonwealth, Patricia Scotland. So this is up there, but as I said earlier on, we're doing things, but we need to speed up. Okay, now this is of essence because just like Clarisse mentioned, that she has spoken to different agencies, different people. Now, if this trade portal could be up and running or an app could be up and running, this would at least cut across this digital kind of space and make everybody come to the same platform. Now, this is an effort we can all put our heads together to make it more viable. That's what I'd like to say in answer to your question.
I mean, the example you gave, Shafquat, is a very potent one. I think the Commonwealth SME Association, and there is also a Commonwealth Alliance of Young Entrepreneurs. I mean, both of them are good in intent. The challenge, of course, is, and how can I be polite about this? I'm looking at Janet. I'm trying to be polite and not be and be diplomatic and say anything that I shouldn't say. But I just have to say what it is. Let me just put it to you this way: if you're talking about a business-driven organization, an international SME association, Alliance of Young Entrepreneurs, you've really got to have business people involved. You know, you can't have it top down. You've got to have business people who know what they're talking about. And the reality is, the SME Association, it's driven out by, you know, it's run by a program from bureaucrats sitting in Marlborough House in London, the Commonwealth Secretariat. The same with the Alliance of Young Entrepreneurs. So it's good in intent, and that's good. It's good that it's there. But what we need to see is something that's really driven by business. And that's the reason, you know, why did women put up their own seed capital to set up a digital platform? Why did they do that? Because they felt nothing else was happening. The Commonwealth Secretariat wasn't doing it. The Commonwealth Enterprise Investment Council wasn't doing it. No chambers were doing it. They just said, right, to your point, Shafquat, the time, the speed. They said, we're not going to wait anymore. We don't want to wait for our daughters, you know, to grow up and then think about doing it. We want to do something now. And these were countries, it was amazing. Women came together from a range of different countries, including from Africa, but also from South Asia and other countries as well. And I think that's really important to your point, both of what you're saying. We need to move quickly and find a way to bring, I mean, in a sense, a lot of these things that you're talking about, both Clarisse and Shafquat, they're kind of they're the ecosystem. You know, you've got the different parts of the system there. You've got the SME network with SMEs. You've got other women's organizations. You've got the Commonwealth has various networks. There are 86 accredited organizations, of which are around 20 to 30 probably that have some sort of private sector interface. But none of them connect to each other very well. Some of them are, you know, are dead ducks, frankly. They don't really exist more than a piece of paper. Some are very active. But we need to do much better at bringing them together in a way that they can collaborate, they can coordinate, and they can really change the dynamic for the lives of citizens in Commonwealth countries, whether it's Kigali or whether it's Karachi. You know, or whether it's Kirkness, you know, wherever it is, the same challenge is there, connectivity. And I think, Clarisse, your point around digital connectivity now, you know, and also Shafquat, making the most of this moment is huge. I want to ask, I mean, Janet, can I just ask any more questions or comments from the audience?
Yes,
or do you want
yes, I actually have one for both of our panelists.
Thank you.
So I'm going to ask the one for Clarisse first. Earlier when you were speaking, you mentioned about training for women. And this is really a two-part question. So the first part is that training specifically to do with trading internationally. And the second part, I know in my own country, in Canada, that there's tremendous support for women entrepreneurs, and particularly those who aspire to take our businesses to an international market. So the second part of the question is, what steps have you taken in your country, if any, to provide women access to international markets?
Okay, great. Thank you, Janet, for your questions. And yes, the training programs that we have are primarily to help women build more competitive businesses, not just so they can trade locally, but also globally. So when you talk about digital trade and specifically around e-commerce, it's really around global competitiveness. We are not oblivious to the fact that a lot of goods are being traded online. And for these businesses, what digital trade does for them is it opens up borders. It opens up the world to their businesses. So that is the primary message that we are communicating. And with the UNCTAD eTrade, eTrade program, that's targeting women in East Africa to trade within the East African region, but also globally. And with the Made in Rwanda incubation program that I mentioned, this is targeting local industries to enable them to be able to be globally competitive. So yes, and in terms of targeting women, we're focusing on sectors that employ women in terms of a majority. And like I mentioned, it's agriculture, it's the fashion industry and other types of SMEs. And, you know, our goal is to really see that we build globally competitive businesses.
Can I ask you a question, Clarisse, from my side?
Sure. Sure,
okay.
Shafquat.
You mentioned that 60% of the women are doing online business, which is the majority. Okay. What is the reason for women? 60% of the women are in online businesses. I'm curious exactly what would be the reason for women being more in online than men.
So for us, I think one of the things that we've seen driving women to get online is the fact that an online business allows for them to be able to do a little bit more, run a business and take care of their families. It opens up a platform for them not to exit the formal, their formal career, whatever it might be, because of, having to stay at home and raise their children. So we have a lot of shops that we're seeing, it's somebody's, it's in their backyard, they're making some kind of children's toys, or, they have a farm somewhere and, they want to keep, rearing chickens or growing whatever it is that they're growing on their farm, but also be able to sell that online. So I think primarily it's because it allows for them to have, a well-rounded life, I would say. But also we've made the barrier to entry quite low for women. And, we're encouraging women to get online. HeHe is, I'm a woman and we have 53% female majority. So maybe there's a bias towards women and how we connect with each other. But I mean, if I were to share a few thoughts on that, that's what I think it is.
That's wonderful to hear. I knew the answer, but I wanted it to come from you. Women can do multitasking.
I mean,
sounds like that was a setup, Clarisse.
Was a setup. Thank you, Shafquat.
You're welcome.
Now I have a question for you, Shafquat.
Yes. Can you tell the difference between online and virtual? Any of you?
Oh, I know. But that's a whole other workshop. We have digital training, online training, virtual training, e-learning.
What is the difference between online and virtual, ma'am?
I can't, it's not my role to hijack this presentation. I have a question to ask you, and I would be happy to have that discussion with you or anyone, but just not in this, at this particular moment. I want to be respectful of your agenda. So my question to you, sir, earlier you talked about taking actions. What would you consider as actions that need to happen in order to take things to the next level?
Okay, when I say need to happen, we get down to sit in meetings, have conversations like this, and we're very happy putting them on all on pen and paper, okay? This should happen, this must happen, should have happened, and stuff like that, with due respect. But generally, when we make recommendations, generally we do not put timelines on those. If you've seen most of the papers, there are many recommendations, many suggestions, but none of them has got a timeline attached to it. So I guess if you had some kind of a benchmark to test ourselves against, or to make a check on our activities, I think that would be very, very beneficial. That would be very, very beneficial. Because when you give a project manager a job to do, what is it? What do you do? He has a Gantt chart, a timeline-based project and stuff like that. But generally, when we make recommendations, suggestions, this is not the case. It's only when a project starts that you start all this timeline business. That's the differentiation I have.
So timelines, setting timelines and attaching timelines, specific goals with these. And I would bet, because when you're setting SMART goals, one of the things that you're supposed to make sure is that it's achievable and it's realistic and it's time bound. And then there's a name attached to it, whether that's a particular person or an organization that's going to take the lead on behalf of everyone else and make sure they get that project across the finish line.
Agreed.
So a couple of people have asked about the platform, and I'm not sure if Arif, if you are the best person to speak to that, or maybe even.
Yeah, let me just briefly say something about that. So the platform, in fact, there's a press release which is coming out today. In fact, it's just been issued in the last few minutes, and I'm going to be formally saying something more about that in the closing remarks with Nisa. So in a moment. So I'll wait until that moment in about 10 minutes before I make the exciting announcement. But what I will say to you is that the platform that we have, it's the most advanced in use by any Commonwealth organization. It's the first time that women have been actively involved in putting it together. They haven't created it, but there's a company in London that's from a startup accelerator from a University of London that they're using. I'll say more about that in a few moments. For us, it was very important to ensure that it was really about doing three things. It's allowing women to connect to each other. So there's a strong community dimension to it. There's around collaborating. So, you know, the tools to enable them to collaborate and learn, I think, is key. So a learning environment was also very important, particularly learning to acquire knowledge, to grow their businesses, to internationalize their businesses, to have capacity building to grow their businesses, and also in terms of their skills and leadership. And the third area is trade, you know, to do business with each other. One of the things that we've been working on is the area of contracting, open contracting, to encourage consortia of women. So a woman from Bangladesh, a woman from Rwanda, a woman from the UK, a woman from Jamaica could come together. They could put together a bid for a tender, working on different skill sets, different time zones, and that consortia-based approach is possible through a platform. So the platform is around the 3 C's. We call it the 3 C's platform. It's around connectivity. It's around, the other C is capacity building, and the third C is commerce. Now, it doesn't currently exist as far as we know in the world today. I mean, the closest you could find is the UN has 2 or 3 initiatives, but they don't address all 3. Certainly not leveraging the Commonwealth advantage that was talked a bit about earlier, where you have a 20% reduced business. You know, Rwanda and Bangladesh, it'll cost them 20% less to do business than Rwanda and Ethiopia or Bangladesh and Bhutan, whatever. You know, so I think there's a Commonwealth advantage there that we need to make the most of. And we also think it's very important because this platform that we're using is also, it's using analytics, it's geared up for artificial intelligence, it is very flexible, it's adaptable. And I said the announcement I'm going to be making in a few moments in the closing remarks will be a very good, I'll be providing very solid evidence in the form of the statement that I'm going to be giving as to why that's the case. Not because I'm saying it, but because another key organization globally is saying it. I won't say more than that.
If I can just piggyback on what you said, you're talking about the platform. It's a really interesting idea to me because as a Commonwealth businesswoman, I have haphazardly found my way to other countries in the Commonwealth and struck up partnerships and teaming agreements with other female founders in Jamaica, Trinidad, Guyana, and Mexico. And as a result, we've grown our businesses together, but we've had to do that and figure that out sort of for ourselves by meeting up randomly at an event and then deciding we like each other and we're going to do business together and then continuing to work together. So it's really interesting that there's going to be a forum to help make some of those connections happen.
Yeah. And this has been, you know, 20 odd years in the making.
A little bit louder, we're having a hard time hearing you.
20 odd years in the making. I mean, this has been talked about for years. I mean, if I had a penny for every Commonwealth meeting I've been to where this has been talked about, I'd be a very rich person, especially in this economic recession we're going into now. But we're doing it. And I mean, what was interesting is that women from different Commonwealth countries, and by the way, let me be very open with you, these are not rich women. You know, these are middle-income women or low-income women, but they have pooled their resources with 1 or 2, I mean, there's a guy involved as well, but pretty much it's driven, and that's really important. And I think exactly, Janet, the point that you've made, we don't want, why should it be haphazard? You know, Janet, you've not got the time to waste on doing it haphazard. You just want to move quickly and have success. So does Clarisse and so does Shafquat. And I think the way the world is changing now, there's no reason why not. So that's really why we've done it. We also have, and I think it's worth just reminding people about this, Commonwealth, we have incredibly valuable plug and play. You know, we have these 80 odd, you know, if you want a Commonwealth network for parliamentarians, for journalists, for the private sector, for medical doctors, for nurses, for sport, for, I mean, you name it, for beekeepers, there's a Commonwealth network for you. So we have a number of those accountants as well as another SMEs, Shafquat you were mentioning. But in any case, what we want to do is we want to connect them together. We want to break the silos. In fact, we don't want to break them, we want to smash them. We want to smash the silos and we want to facilitate these linkages through the platform we've got. Now, how are we going to make money from it? How are we going to monetize it? What's the business model? Well, that's what we're working out now. We've got some ideas and plans around that, but we have a core principle, which is very important to us, that we've had a long debate about, but we've decided that's what we want to do. And it's a little bit like something that's very precious in the UK called the National Health Service, which has a basic principle, which is free at the point of access. And that's no different to the Commonwealth Businesswomen platform. It's free at the point of access. No matter who you are, no matter where you are, you access it for free, you join the community for free, and then you can do a number of things, a number of additional things you may need to pay something for, but not a lot. And that's kind of the way we're doing it. So we're all, at the moment, volunteers in the Businesswomen's Network. We put in some seed funding, but we're now trying to ensure we have a sustainable footing to drive this thing forward. And that's really, really important. Janet, how are we doing on time? Are we...
we have about 9 minutes left, but we do have one more question that has come up. And so if I may, I'd like to ask that. It's an interesting question to me because, as I said, I have created partnerships and teaming agreements with a number of other female founders around the world. And my colleague in Guyana has brought this same issue to my attention at times when we've been working on projects together. It's specifically around receiving payment for work that we do. And she has mentioned to me, living in Guyana, that there are some limitations that she faces around things like PayPal and how they are able to interact with that. The question that's come in is how digital payments are playing a role for women, women's roles in trade in Rwanda and other South Asia countries. So I'm guessing from that question, perhaps other countries, women in other countries run into these kinds of issues around being able to accept electronic payments or make electronic payments. And I know even just for me, when I'm trying to do an electronic funds transfer to certain countries to pay for services happening in those countries, it can be a bit of a challenge. And in Canada, we have a pretty sophisticated banking system, so I'm sure others run into difficulties.
PayPal is an issue in Bangladesh as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and this was an issue, Shafquat. You remember when we were there with the senior trade officials back in February this year, just 5-6 months ago, there was a whole item of discussion that became very animated. And people said, about people, we talked about our platform. And I won't say who the person was, but there was a person that works for an Asian NGO. And she said, well, you know, all these platforms, why are you doing this? You should just be using PayPal. You should be using X, Y, or Z. And then we made the point, in fact, other people, someone from the Commonwealth Secretariat got up and said, well, actually, the problem with those platforms is they're so damn expensive. They're not very user-friendly in that respect. And there are challenges there. So I think there is a point here around what is happening with digital currencies in the Commonwealth. And what does that mean for breaking barriers down, facilitating payments more easily, and enabling things to be better? And I think this is an area that I know that CTO, again, I won't steal a mark from what they're going to be announcing in a few moments, but that is also another area that's also very topical. Clarisse, did you want to say something about the payments? How have you dealt with that issue, particularly when you've been trying to work? I know there's a lot of momentum in Africa with the African Free Trade Area in terms of connectivity, but particularly when you're working countries outside where the payment challenges may be more limited and where you haven't got direct access. How have you dealt with that?
Oh yeah, I mean, I could resonate with everyone. We've had huge challenges around digital payments. And there are a couple of interventions through the, EWTP platform that is being developed with the World Trade Organization. But there are quite a couple of challenges, even in terms of broader financial inclusion. But it's one of the things that we try to enable our businesses that we're getting online to have access to. So we do offer some digital payment solutions, but not very comprehensive. But at least it gets them started. It allows for women to be able to accept digital payments, for their, farm produce and things like that. But there are quite a couple of challenges in terms of the broader, global trade as well as financial inclusion.
I mean, anybody from Kenya who's on the call, and I'm just on the audience, I see we have there, you'll know very well about Safaricom's Easy Passa, which is pioneering. In fact, we have tomorrow, we have Sandra Jambo, who's in a senior role at Safaricom. She's actually the new Chief Executive of UN Global Compact. She's we have a series of conversations tomorrow. And by the way, if you go to the CBWN website, you'll see cbwn.org. You'll see we have a series of conversations tomorrow with women leaders in the Commonwealth, starting in the morning, finishing later in the afternoon. We start in the Pacific, we end in the Caribbean, 30-minute segments, short conversations with women and the journey that they've made. And very much like Clarisse is saying, what's the journey that you've had? These are women from different backgrounds, right through their life journey, and talking about the challenges and how they've dealt with them, particularly in business. And I think the issue around payments is a very real one. And I think this is an area where I think we need more work to be done. But we also, in the process, Janet, and I'm looking to you and I'm looking to Clarisse, we need Janet, we need you, we need Clarisse, we need all the women to be part of that conversation, to be telling us, what are your experiences, what are your challenges, what are your solutions? And also, Shafquat, I'm looking to you as well, because in South Asia, although you've not directly referenced it, I think you should say something briefly, perhaps, about the South Asia Chamber, the Women's Council. The SAARC, the South Asia Chamber, has a very well established, and I have had previous experience of working with them, the SAARC Women's Council, I think it's called, which brings together the business communities across the South Asian countries. You want to just say something very briefly about that, because people may not even be aware that there is a business community that brings together business women across a quarter of the world's population. Okay.
Are you talking about the Women's Council?
Correct. Yeah, that's right.
Okay. The SAARC Chamber has a very active Women's Entrepreneurship Council. And obviously, as we say SAARC, each of the countries has quite a few representatives on that board. And they're in place for 2 years. But that doesn't mean they're reps. That basically means they're supposed to back end the whole process into their countries, respective countries. And coming back to what I mentioned earlier as a Commonwealth Trade Portal, the same exercise is now being carried out for the SAARC Trade Portal. So when this thing came up about the Commonwealth, I informed them about that. And we said, rather than repeating the exercise, why don't you bring everybody's thought processes, efforts together and make it one central exercise? So what I'm trying to say is this is something which is being talked about. Proposals have been made. I actually made a proposal to Commonwealth on behalf of the sector, the SMEs. And the same thing happened with SAARC. And even today, when I was talking to one of the former Secretary Generals of SAARC, and I mentioned that I'd be on this program, and I invited him as well, he said, why did you talk about the SAARC Trade Portal? So I said, that we can talk in tandem with what's going to happen in future. So everything is live, as I said. Now we just we need to converge somewhere, and very quickly. And I just want to make a point here, if you'll allow me, that if we really want to benefit from the digital economy, it really requires affordable telecommunication services, okay? Now this is a pretty big diverse area, because some developed countries have lower charges than lower developing economies having higher charges for access to internet. Now, this dichotomy is actually not being able to, enabling you to join on a level playing field. That's another challenge. The charges, the taxes are higher in the least developed countries on access to the internet services. Now, as a Commonwealth, whether we could emphasize this fact to the Commonwealth countries, whether we could talk and make things a little more, what should I say, acceptable, palatable to the existing economies in the region. We are 54 countries now. Around 50% are okay, around 50% are not okay.
Well, I'm conscious of the time. We have 1 minute left to wrap up this session, and then we have some closing remarks by Arif as well as Nisa. So would you be able to perhaps, we don't have any more questions in the queue. So would you like to wrap this session up, Arif, and we'll move to our close?
Yeah, thank you very much. So let me just do that in the few seconds we've got remaining by thanking Clarisse, Irabagiza there. I think you win the prize, Clarisse, for the prettiest garden. I love that tree in the background there.
Thank you.
I'm gonna, when I go to Kigali, I'm gonna, you know, you've got to invite me for a cup of tea or something.
Thank you.
That's great.
You're welcome.
It's very hot here in London, but I think that definitely looks, you know, the best option. Shafquat, you and I are a bit more traditional. We've got a sort of books or whatever in the background.
Right. I've been wearing a jacket after a long, long time.
I know. Yeah. Well, I'm wearing a shirt and a tie, but I'm not going to tell you that I'm wearing shorts underneath because, of course,
yeah.
No. But that's the truth. But there you go. I probably shouldn't have said that. Shafquat, thank you so much for joining us as well. I know that it's later in Dhaka, but I appreciate your joining us and adding a rich perspective. Clarisse as well. Both of you. It's been a smaller conversation with the three of us, but I think a very rich one. Raised a number of key points around digital payments, around Commonwealth initiatives in the area of trade that need to be better known, and supported and understood, and also the central importance of women in business, which has been a theme running throughout today. So with that, we'll close this session. Now we're carrying on directly with the closing session, but I'll let Janet provide the link to that. Thank you, Janet.
Sorry, I was on mute.
Thank you very much.
So last reminder, if you would like to download the document that was referenced during this session, pull out your cell phone, open up your camera, and you can scan this QR code, and then you can just tap on the little box that appears, and you'll be able to save and download and save that for yourself. I did mention a little while ago that there have been questions about what's going to happen with the documents. We're working behind the scenes diligently to make sure that we make everything available. All of the videos from today, you know, it's been recorded in one massive file, if you can appreciate that. So that needs to be separated into the individual sessions and then tidied up. So those will be available, as well as the sessions, the videos from tomorrow's session, which hasn't happened yet, of course. I hope you will join us again tomorrow. You can certainly go to the Commonwealth Businesswomen's Network website and find the registration information if you don't already have it. Again, always asking you and inviting you to connect with everyone on social media so that we can continue the conversation, although I know that Arif and Nisa are going to talk about continuing that conversation on the CBWN network website and whatnot. So we've got the Twitter hashtags, we've got the Twitter handles, we've got LinkedIn. There's really no reason for us not to be able to stay connected now that we have come together. And I am going to hand it over in a moment, but I would say that we have, as many people have expressed in the chat, we have learned so much today. I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed, to be honest, but we've learned so much, and really, unless we go away and apply those learnings, nothing happens. That's the only thing that changes the world, when we take what we've learned and we do something with it. So my last words for the day would be to make sure you go out there and use the information from today to change the world and make it a better place, because that's what we're all trying to do together.